Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on our risk management root cause analysis webinar. I'm going to walk us through just an introduction very quickly. So my name is Hisham Daboura, and I will be your presenter along with Sabrina Ippolito. Just to give you a little bit of a background on both of us. So Sabrina is a biochemist. She's a certified lead auditor. She works with industries such as pharmaceutical, cosmetics, manufacturing. She has extensive experience improving quality systems in both the US and Canada, and is affiliated with the IOCQ and ASQ. My name again, Hisham Daboura. I'm the regional sales manager for industrial and transportation for SGS. I've been in sales for about 16 years, 6 years within the certification industry. I specialize predominantly in automotive, aerospace, and industrial manufacturing. Also help with supply chain quality compliance, again, within the US and Canada. And a little bit of a history on SGS. So SGS was founded in 1878. Within the mid-20th century, we've expanded our services into inspection, testing, verification services. And 1981 was listed on the Swiss Stock Exchange. Today, we have over 140 years in business, and SGS is a world leader with almost 100,000 employees and 2,600 offices and labs globally, and focuses in 7 key sectors. Why would you choose to do business with SGS? Well, in terms of our global network, connecting you globally with local experts in over 190 countries, quality of service. We uphold the highest standards of excellence in every service that we perform. Our industry experience, we have, again, 140 years of experience of delivering tailored solutions across industries, digital innovation. We utilize advanced technology to streamline compliance and certification. And corporate sustainability, integrating sustainability into our operations and making sure that that's supporting your goals. In terms of our business assurance division, which is responsible specifically for certifications, we have comprehensive services from pre-audit certification compliance needs, supply chain assurances, doing customized audits to give you visibility and transparency through your supply chain, consulting services, which help enhance operations, productivity, and managing change while minimizing risks. We also offer training through our SGS Academy. We have digital and in-person. We can tailor those to either a specific proposal just for your company, or if you want to join one of our public courses that are available to you as well. We'll talk a little bit about that at the end as well. Sustainability assurance, helping implement efficient processes and address sustainability risks to achieve your goals. Medical device regulatory compliance, supporting compliance with regulations and standards for medical devices. And I'll hand it off to Sabrina to take us through our agenda for the presentation today.
Thanks so much, Hisham. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here with you guys all today. On my agenda, I've got 2 very important topics I'd like to address today. So the first is on risk management. So that's going to be part 1. We're going to start off with a very brief overview of what risk management is, followed by how to analyze risk and the interested parties involved in doing so. Then we're going to look at a couple of examples of tools that can be used. Our second part is on root cause analysis. This seems to be one of the pain points of many organizations, or at least some of the ones that I have audited. And when I do some training, it happens to be one of the areas that quite a significant number of my trainees will say that they do experience a difficult time with. So I figured, well, why not? Why not discuss root cause analysis? It's definitely worthwhile to bring it and to shed some light onto it and discuss it and see what it is, how we can perform a proper root cause analysis, and what are some tools that can be used in carrying out this process. And finally, towards the end of the course, or towards the end of the webinar, I should say, at the end of our learning event, we are going to end off with a question and answer period. So without further ado, risk management. So what is risk management? Well, it's definitely a process. And in this process, we use it to identify, to assess, to evaluate, prioritize, and control the probability and impact of unfortunate events that relate to financial, legal, strategic, and security risks to an organization's capital and earnings. Through risk management, organizations can equally maximize the realization of opportunities. So this is also important to note, that while we are doing a risk assessment or we're analyzing maybe potential risks, through this analysis or through this process, we can also determine some opportunities. So here's our first poll question. Is risk management proactively embedded in your daily operations? Or is it treated as a separate process periodically, such as once a year? I'll give you a couple of minutes to answer this. Good. Nice. Got 66 out of the attendees, 62% attendees have answered. A little more. Let's see what we get. All right, let's see what we have. So we have embedded in daily operations, treated as a separate. Okay. So that's actually one of the things I've noticed when I have been auditing organizations, is that companies that tend to embed risk management in their daily operations and use it really as a tool tend to be more proactive in how they treat risk and how they deal with issues as they arise. So for those of you that treat it as a separate process, I would encourage you to rethink it. And I would encourage you to think about, how is it that you can embed it in your everyday life, in your everyday processes that you carry out within the organization. This isn't to say that one method is right and the other method is wrong. There are different ways that we can show conformance and compliance. It's about finding the way that works best for your company. So, the 2015 version of the standard makes risk-based thinking more explicit, and it incorporates it in requirements for the establishment, implementation, maintenance, and continual improvement of the system. This is to say that when you're analyzing risk, or you're thinking about implementing the risk analysis tool within your management system, you need to align the complexity of that tool with the complexity of your organization. And that is what you manufacture. So what it is that you produce, the services that you offer your customers, or sometimes the processes that you're offering your customers. There should be an alignment. So I'll give you an example. If, let's say, your organization is in the business of making nuts, bolts, and rivets for the construction industry or for home renos, your risk management tool might not be overly complex because you're using these tools in production. You're using these tools in renovations, in home renos. But let's say there happened to be a strength that was identified, which you now turned into an opportunity, and you're like, hey, we're already making nuts, bolts, and rivets. We can actually make these nuts, bolts, and rivets to service the nuclear industry. Well, in that case, you need to think about this, because when you're getting into nuclear or when you're getting into aerospace, the needs, wants, and expectations of the industry change. So while you're still in the business of making nuts, bolts, and rivets, you need to think about who are you making them for? And what will that do in turn regarding the complexity of your systems? And therefore, when it comes to analyzing risk, should the tool that you have implemented, should that be a little bit more complex? So I want you to think about this, engage in critical thought, right? One of the things you can do, one of the things you can also consider is look into the ISO 31000. This provides an excellent guideline on formal risk management that can be appropriate in specific organizational contexts. Again, this is really only to get you to think. You can also leverage what they have on Google. So if you do a very quick Google check, and see what's out there and what makes sense. It has to be a good fit for your organization. So let's consider the standard. Let's think about ISO 9001. And specifically, let's consider clause 6 that has to deal with planning. Actions to address risks and opportunities. So one of the key purposes of a management system is to act as a preventive tool. The standard does not have a separate clause or subclause titled preventive action. The concept of preventive action is expressed through a risk-based approach to formulating QMS requirements. So, although risks and opportunities must be determined and addressed, there is no requirement for formal risk management or a documented risk management process. That is to say, the standard will not obligate you, does not oblige you to formalize and to have risk management documented. But even if it doesn't oblige you, think about it strategically. It makes sense to have this documented. Say, for instance, your subject matter expert, the individual who has the sole responsibility of dealing with risk, has been given the responsibility and the role for analyzing risk, for figuring out what the risk is, for determining where are we in the status of dealing with the risks that we have. Should they win the lottery? Should they be somewhere off in Europe, enjoying the scenery, enjoying a nice glass of wine somewhere? They're probably not thinking about risk themselves. So you want that individual who has now inherited the job or who has inherited the roles and the responsibility. You want that transition to be seamless. You want it so that people are speaking the same language, if you will, in a way. So again, the standard will not obligate you. If you tell me, Sabrina, show me where it's written in the standard that I need to formalize it. It's not written in the standard that you need to formalize it. But I highly recommend that you formalize this, because you do create that alignment between one person and a second person who has to look at the document or who has to discuss risk. Again, if we look at the clause, if we consider clause 6.1, and this is where we're normally addressing risks and opportunities, okay? The standard will tell you, reflect back and go back and think about clauses 4.1 and 4.2. So in this case, it's worthwhile to look at, well, what does 4.1 and 4.2 suggest? What are they saying? What's it saying? Well, if you need to document, or if you need to think about risk, what does that actually mean? What does that actually look like? When the standard 6.1 refers you back to clauses 4.1 and 4.2, essentially what it's asking you to do is think about your company, think about your organization. What is it that you do? What is it that you manufacture? Who is it that you're supporting? What are you supporting? So you need to understand who you are as a company. You might want to look at, the good place for you to start is maybe look at your company's webpage, or maybe look at some marketing information. Now, naturally, if your marketing information is dated, you kind of want to make sure that that's up to date and that is current. And the reason why we say this is because a company, all organizations are dynamic. We're not static. And therefore, your needs, wants, and expectations, and just the dynamic of the organization changes. And therefore, your management system should change as a consequence. And in some cases, the tools that you're using may no longer be good to use anymore, such as a risk management tool. And you might have to use something either more complex because you're diving into industries that are a little bit more complex, regulatory related perhaps, or in some cases you've decided that this is not the field, or this is not the way we want to go. Maybe we don't want to be in aerospace anymore and we want to just focus on the construction industry, and therefore you're not as complex, and therefore your tools that were once very convoluted, you might decide on a more simplistic form or a more simplistic process instead. So it is important that before you do your risk analysis, think about who are you as a company. Think about the companies that you are supporting. Who are your top 5, your top 10 companies that you're supporting? And what industries are you actually supporting? What is the complexity? And your risk management tool should be aligned to that complexity. That being said, once you've determined who your companies, who the main companies are that you're doing business with, it's important that you understand the needs, the wants, and expectations of those individuals, of those customers who are in part your interested parties. And that is both between yourself and your interested party, and the interested party towards the organization. So you need to determine first, who are you as a company? Who is it that you're supporting? Then determine who are or what are the interested parties for your organization. You might have your employees, management, a steering committee. These might be internals. As external interested parties, you might have your suppliers, your customers, maybe some regulatory bodies. This is where you now determine the needs, wants, and expectations of those interested parties. So again, let's always stick back to section 6.1. And the reason for it is because this is a section, this is a clause that reports or that talks about risks and opportunities. And if we look at section 6.1, it takes us also or references section 4.4. So what is 4.4 talking about? Okay, well, let's look into it. Quality management system and its processes. And if you go all the way to section F or subsection F, it says address the risks and opportunities as determined in accordance with the requirements of 6.1. So when you consider this, remember, you've thought about your organization, you've thought about the interested parties, you thought about the needs, wants, and expectations. So now that you've determined the risks, the issues, the problematic areas, you don't just do nothing with them, say, here, I've determined them and my job is done. You need to complete the loop. What are the risks? Assess them. Maybe not every single risk that you've documented needs the attention that it deserves. Maybe some risks could be put aside and say, I need to think about this a little bit further, or maybe put this on the back burner. It's important, but it doesn't yet need to be dealt with right at this moment. So within your organization, is risk management a process conducted solely by mid-senior level leadership? Yes, no, or you're not so sure? I'll give you some time to answer. Okay, let's see what we've got here. Okay, good. So when you're thinking about risk, and I asked this question because it is an important question. So when we think of organizations, when we think of companies, we know that senior level leadership, CEO, the president, maybe VPs, they have to look at risk. They look at risk globally. They might look at risk from specifically from an organizational perspective. Because at the end of the day, I mean, they're in business because they're wanting to generate a revenue, right? Obviously to do good for industry and to do well for the economy, but they want to be able to meet their KPIs, and that's whether to increase business growth by 5% per month or by 10% per quarter, whatever that might look like. Well, the thing is, in order to help support them, it's also important that they are aware of the risks that are related to interested parties and the risks that are related to your processes, so the processes within the company. And they might not have that visibility, which is why when we're thinking or when we're looking at risk and we're analyzing risk, we should consider all aspects and all areas of the company. So when we put it all together, when you're identifying and evaluating risk, you want to involve pertinent individuals to partake in the exercise. Their expertise is invaluable and it paints a much better picture of the situation. So this means that if you have to, let's say if you're you're implementing a quality management system, you're in the thick of things, and you need to do, or you'd like to do a first run at risk management or identifying what the risks are. I highly recommend you do not do this on your own. You might be the one in charge or chaperoning the implementation project. But this does not mean that you do everything on your own. Because remember, you're not a subject matter expert on everything. You're a subject matter expert on what it is that you're doing, on what it is that you're executing, on the roles and the responsibilities that you were given. So maybe that's the aspect that you can do on your own, which even at that, I would probably invite other people to the proverbial table and have a discussion and see, have I missed anything? So when you are looking at risk, you do need to consider risk from 3 levels. You need to look at risk from an organizational perspective. You need to look at risk from the perspective of interested parties, and this is looking at internal interested parties, like I mentioned, your employees, upper management, stakeholders, steering committee maybe, your external interested parties, your vendors, your suppliers, maybe your contractors, perhaps your customers, regulatory bodies. So look at risks from organizational perspective, from your interested parties, and based on your processes. So what does that actually mean based on your processes? It means think about the core processes within your company. You've got sales, you've got purchasing, you've got receiving. You might have inventory control. You might have the laboratory, so quality control. Think of all of your processes. Invite people to the proverbial table and ask them, what are risks? What are things that we need to mitigate? Problematic areas within your department or within your process that requires our attention. Remember, you're in a position to make change. You cannot make change if people aren't telling you that, hey, these areas are problematic. So keep reminding individuals of that. So when we're looking at the organization, some of the issues you might want to think about or would be, let's say, cybersecurity. You might not have the answer to this. So it's important that you have this discussion with upper management. Now, most organizations, I can't say all organizations because some companies are really small that they might not do this, albeit that they should. But when you're considering risk from an organizational perspective, this might be a discussion you might want to have with leadership or with upper management, with the CEO, with some vice presidents or directors within the company. Some people will say, you know, I'm not comfortable sharing this with you, but know that we've done it, and that's okay. One of the things I would recommend that you do, especially if you're deciding to put in place a risk management tool, before you do any analysis for risk, ask upper management, ask leadership, ask the VPs and directors. If they are analyzing risk at their level, organizational perspective, what is the tool that they're using? Don't reinvent the wheel, because if there is a tool that exists already, piggyback off of it. Ask them, provide me a training on how you use this, because we'd like to use the same tool. It exists. Why not use the same tool? And if one doesn't exist, create one. And I'll give you a couple of examples of one that you can use. Interested parties. So first and foremost, you need to figure out who you are as a company. Then you need to figure out who are the interested parties. I like to subcategorize who are my internal interested parties, my external interested parties. And then I invite people to the proverbial table and we discuss what are the interests, what are the concerns, what are the needs, what are the expectations, what are the wants, what are the desires of all of my interested parties. Through a SWOT analysis, I can determine what my strengths are, what the weaknesses are for that internal interested party and external interested party. I can determine some opportunities and some threats. This is an excellent, excellent brainstorming session that you can actually invite people to share their thoughts. And it works perfectly because everybody feeds on each other's ideas. Once that's been determined, your weaknesses and your threats are now the risks that you have to mitigate. Think about your processes. You've got people in sales, you've got people in quoting, you might have people in servicing or purchasing or receiving, you got people in shipping, maybe in the lab. All right. Think about the inputs, think about the outputs. What is the activity that they're performing? Like, for instance, when you're looking at sales or quoting, when you're providing a quote, there might be, who knows, an entry error that's made. Another risk is, well, we create all of these quotes, but nobody really does a follow-up. So there might be potential loss of client or loss of revenue. Who knows, maybe low profit margins. So when we do look at the risks and the opportunities on a process level, we're becoming a lot more granular. And we are involving people in the discussion. And we're allowing them to have a certain amount of responsibility and accountability that we would otherwise not think about if it was just a one-person show running the risk management tool. So I highly recommend, and in some case, I guess you could say I'm challenging you, if you're not doing this already, invite people, have people partake in this exercise. You'd be surprised what you're going to come up with. So these are some different ways that we can use in order for us to assess risk. We can use a qualitative perspective. So this is my little heat map where we're using words, descriptive words like minor, moderate, major, likely, possible, unlikely. This is feasible. This can be used. It's your prerogative if you choose to do this. But then my challenge to you, or I suppose my challenge to you would be, well, how do you determine a minor versus a moderate if I'm leaving it up to the person to determine what the risk is? Because remember, we have all different experiences, and it's our experiences that feed how we come to knowledge or how we perceive information, how we perceive the data that we're evaluating. So a qualitative risk management tool is good. Is it the best? Well, that depends, again, on your company, depends on the context of your organization. What I like is a quantitative approach. So I'm a huge fan of a 5x5 matrix. This is what I typically use. I put down all of my information. I have my x-axis that looks at my probability of an occurrence. I have my y-axis that focuses on the impact. I quantify. I also provide a range. Like for instance, remote, it happens between 0 and 5% of the time. I don't need to have a 20, 20, 20, 20, 20 equal split. I could be the one who determines what that range is. 0 to 5% for remote, for instance. For unlikely to occur might be between 5 and 9%. Moderate between 10 and 50. That's 50. Likely to occur might be between 50 and 90. And highly likely to occur is 90 and above. And I can use this tool. For impact, you might decide on a dollar value. I also like a heat map because when you see color, you can automatically say, okay, well, let's see, I'm in the red zone. I have to open up a corrective action. If I can't eliminate my risk, I have to be able to at least reduce the risk through mitigating it. The way that I have this set up, and again, this is because this is how I decided I wanted to set this up for my company, for my organization. So I would say that if I'm somewhere in the red zone, and I determined what the red zone is, I could have included 12 as well. I decided to keep it between 15 to 25. And if I'm keeping it between 15 to 25, yes, I have to open up a corrective action. And yes, I have to eliminate my risk. But if I cannot eliminate the risk, I need to be able to at least reduce my risk. In my yellow area, sure, I can open up a corrective action. I should open up a corrective action. But however, if I determine that a corrective action is not needed, that's okay too. I just need to justify why I'm not opening a corrective action. Saying that you have a lack of resources isn't good. So think about it strategically. Why wouldn't you open up a corrective action? Now, like I said, sometimes we have risk. I would have loved, I always use a tornado example or a hurricane example, but I can't be using that anymore these days. So had it been before last Friday, I could say, well, we rarely get hurricanes, and whatever we get in hurricanes is always a tail end. And whenever it is a tail end, it doesn't really cause any damage. So do I need to hurricane proof or tornado proof my dwelling, my business, my house, as an example? Well, before Friday, I'd say this is so remote or so unlikely to occur, I probably wouldn't have to. Today, I think I'm hovering more around the 4 and the 5 because we are getting a lot more issues due to climatic change and so forth. So the intention of this is that whenever you are looking at risk, remember risk as well is dynamic. So what may have been remote or highly unlikely to occur in present day, you might actually be increasing the risk. So even though you're documenting your risk, and you might be formalizing this, let's say on a list, for instance, it's important that you also go back and you look at the previous risks that were identified once upon a time ago and determine, is this now a risk that we have to look at? So this is how you could analyze risk. You can tabulate it, you formalize it, you've got risk all documented on the second column. You can look at the probability, the impact, and then you get your total RPN, which is your total risk priority number. And the way that you do that is that you multiply your probability by your impact. Like I said, if you're in the red zone, according to this graph here, yes, I absolutely need to open up a corrective action and I need to address it. If I'm in the yellow zone, a corrective action should be open, but if you decide not to open, you need to justify why. If you're in the green zone, according to my legend, okay, I acknowledge it's a risk, but I feel comfortable with this risk. So therefore, I will not open up a corrective action, but I'm making that determination. Now, don't be sly little people. If you are in the yellow zone, don't try hard to push it in the green zone. As an auditor, we look at these things. And if you're in the red zone, don't try hard to push it in the yellow zone and then try even harder to justify why you're not going to open up a corrective action. Remember, we look at these things, we will challenge you. That's the purpose of an audit also, right? We want to know what you have in place is actually working for you. We're there to support you, not to just make you avoid doing extra paperwork or documentation. There's certain things that are definitely worth you thinking about. So you can tabulate this. It doesn't have to be a thesis that you're writing. It doesn't have to be a very long, complex document. You can use Excel spreadsheets. You can use Excel to just tabulate all of the risks and then use this to look at periodically, whatever that might look like, throughout the year. Are these risks still, in fact, a 25 as an example? Have they been brought down to a 20? So like, for instance, back in the day when we had COVID, we can pretty much all agree that for the most part, we were at a very high risk. We were at 25. So what did people do to eliminate this? Well, we knew we couldn't eliminate it. The only thing we could do was mitigate it. So while infection was sure, they were sure to be infected if you were around someone that was infected, they put certain strategies in place. Like, for instance, well, if you're supposed to finish your shift at midnight, you're going to finish your shift at 11:45. And if you're supposed to start your shift at midnight, you're going to start your shift at 1:15 in the morning. In that half an hour gap, that's where people were cleaning or sanitizing as best as they can. So also there would be no overlap. While this did not eliminate the risk, this did reduce the spread of infection. So by default, you weren't maybe in a 25 anymore. You might have been hovering around the 16. So that's it for part one. Now we're on to part two. So this is where we're going to be looking at root cause analysis, RCA. So root cause analysis is used to determine why. So this too is a tool. It's used to determine why a nonconformity or an incident has occurred. Most root cause analysis conducted by companies are in fact flawed. This I can attest to it because I have seen what organizations have done with root cause analysis or how they do it. And for the most part, it's usually very superficial, looking at apathy, human error, or other things. So you need to think that, and this is in fact a reality, because if you just do a little bit of digging, you will find that approximately 90% of issues are in fact management system deficiencies. I'll give you an example. There was one audit I had done. And when I started looking at, well, you know, one of the issues is that we need to retrain someone. And I said, well, how did you retrain this person? I wanted to understand a little bit more of the process. And they said, well, we retrain by doing a read and understand. So you read the document, you understand it, and now you're trained. And I looked at him, I'm like, did you ever think that maybe the process of read and understand is the problem? I was like, what are you talking about, Sabrina? That's how we train everybody. I'm like, yeah, but everybody comes in with a different baggage, a different understanding, different knowledge. They all come from different organizations. Some people are coming out right out of university. Anyone can read black on white, but you need to give it a soul. You need to give it a heartbeat. You need to make people understand this is what the words mean in the context of this process or in the context of our company. And this is where some organizations fail. So the whole let me retrain, and even worse, let me retrain through read and understand, might not be effective. So in this case, it's not because it's the person who's failing or who requires that training, but maybe we need to look at the metric or the method or the tools that are being used in training. So RCA defined, a root cause is the absence of best practice or the failure to apply knowledge that would have prevented the problem. Completely separate process from incident management and immediate corrective action, although often completed in close proximity. They're often done simultaneously. RCA requires the investigator to look beyond the solution to the immediate problem and understand the root cause or causes. RCA and incident investigation are connected by three basic questions. What is the problem? Why did it happen? And what will be done to prevent further occurrence? So let's consider the process itself. You want to be able to realize what the problem is. What is the issue? You want to gather as much data, as much information about the problem. Is it the first occurrence? Has it occurred before? What happened? Why did it happen? Determine possible causal factors, like why did that occur? What's the reason? You want to identify the root cause. There might be one, there might be several. And you want to recommend and implement solutions. Again, don't try to attempt root cause analysis on your own. Use it as a brainstorming question. Invite pertinent people to the meeting. This doesn't mean you're inviting 20, 30 people. Sometimes adding more people will cause a complexity. So you are probably better off having a handful of people to have this discussion. And if at the end of the day, you didn't resolve the issue, maybe try a different set of people. So these are some possible tools you could use. You might have heard of the fishbone diagram. You might have heard of the causal factor tree analysis or change analysis. There's a barrier analysis. One of my favorites are the 5 whys. I also like the failure modes effects analysis and the fishbone diagram. This is another little thing I'd like to point out. If you are already using a root cause analysis or you already have RCA implemented within your organization, some people, and what I've seen some organizations do, say, well, you need to use the 5 whys analysis. Sometimes the 5 whys analysis is not sufficient or is not good enough for the event that occurred or for the investigation that needs to be done. So what I recommend is include some examples of tools that can be used in root cause analysis. As an example, fishbone diagram, 5 whys analysis, parent analysis, etc. And leave it to the individual that is supposed to carry out the task to figure out the tool that they feel comfortable using. Don't go against the grain. It's difficult enough. Don't give it another layer of complexity. So what tool does your company use to analyze the root cause of an undesirable event? I'll give you a couple of seconds to answer this question. I'll give you guys a few more seconds. We're good. 5 whys. Oh, how I enjoy that one. Good. It's typically what I see. Fishbone diagram, 5 whys, registry. Yeah, the organization leaves it up to. Nice. Good on you. The organization leaves it up to you to determine the best method to use, the one that you're most comfortable with. For those of you that do not carry out root cause analysis yet, if you have a management system, you definitely need to do that. If you're thinking about having a management system and you're wanting to better your processes before implementing one, maybe you are thinking about implementing one in the future, think about what we're discussing here, especially in the second part of the learning event, and see if there's anything insightful that you might use. Well done. Good. So this is an example of the fishbone diagram that you can use. You're looking at machinery, you're looking at methods, measurements, materials, maybe people, environment. And it's coming up with what are the possible reasons or the possible events that might have occurred that caused that undesirable event. So you put down anything and everything that you think is relevant, and then we take it from there. 5 whys. If anyone has a toddler or if anyone's raised a toddler, you might think to yourself that your toddler is probably an expert of doing the 5 whys. I know my daughter, she's 4 years old, and boy, oh boy, she is an excellent 5 whys analysis little person. So I'll give you an example of how we could use the 5 whys. So when I started my career with SGS. This goes back maybe a little over 8 years ago. I might be hovering at the 9 or 10 year mark by now. I had done an audit and I found myself in an organization, and the lead during that audit, she was in and around my age group. So think of it in terms of our early 30s, mid 30s, we were around there. And I happened to pick a file, and I noticed that on the file, it said Bob fell down and he hurt himself, on some oil. And I was like, oh my God, what happened to Bob? And she's like, oh, Bob, he fell down and he hurt himself. I'm like, oh my goodness, poor Bob. And so I said, so what did you do? She's like, I showed him how he has to walk in the warehouse and how to watch for puddles of oil. And I was like, hang on a second, how old is Bob? And she further tells me, she's like, well, we were supposed to have his retirement party on Friday, but because he hurt himself, that won't happen. I said, so is he close to retirement? He must be in his 60s, mid 60s, probably inching towards 70. She says, yeah. And I said, hang on a second. I'm like, you're probably my age. He's probably old enough to be your father. You mean to tell me as a corrective measure, you showed Bob how to walk through a warehouse? She says, yes. And I showed him how to be careful for oil spills. I said, well, is it normal that you have oil spills? She says, no. I'm like, okay, so let's think about this for a second. I'm like, where was the oil spill? And she tells me, she says, well, it was near the Big Blue Ben. And so this is an organization that does CNC. They do bending of metals and materials and whatnot. I was like, okay. I said, Big Blue Ben seems really new to me. She says, yeah, we bought him I think it was 18 months ago, might have been 2 years ago. And I was like, all right, no problem. I said, so help me understand something. Why was Big Blue Ben leaking oil? She says, I don't know. Very cheeky attitude. I said, no problem. Does someone know? Does someone do PM over here, preventative maintenance? I said, yeah, we have a guy. I'm like, excellent. Bring him over. So he comes in. Hi, how's it going? How can I help you? I'm like, Bob, what happened to Bob? She said, I know, poor Bob. I'm like, oh, poor Bob. Why did Bob get hurt? Bob slipped on oil. But why did Bob slip on oil? We don't know. Big Blue Ben was leaking oil. And I said, but why was the Big Blue Ben leaking oil? And he says, well, I don't know. I was like, well, when was the last time you did preventative maintenance on this? And he thinks for a while and he says, Sabrina, I don't know what to tell you. I don't know. And I said, well, do you have a calendar? Could you check? So he looks to his calendar. He's like, let me get back to you. Comes back. He's like, Sabrina, Big Blue Ben is not on my list. And I said, well, that's interesting. So why is the Big Blue Ben not on your list? I don't know. I said, well, why don't you look at how you onboard new pieces of equipment? And lo and behold, there was no process once you've purchased equipment on how to onboard new equipment, or even in the equipment procedure on how to onboard new equipment recently purchased. And so I asked, I said, could it be that the issue why the machine was leaking oil was because you hadn't done preventative maintenance? And you hadn't done preventative maintenance because there is no process in place for onboarding new equipment. They looked at me as if they were deers in front of headlights. And I said, well, maybe that's the problem. So I said, maybe that's the reason why Bob fell down and got hurt, because we couldn't do any preventative maintenance that needed to be done. And the reason we didn't do it is that you do not have a process for onboarding new machinery. So that is how we could use a 5 whys analysis. Of all of the analyses, of all of the different tools that you can use, the 5 whys is super easy. I recommend, if you have a toddler in your family, listen to them when they're asking you why. They do the 5 whys analysis better than anybody I know. So, is RCA managed? Your root cause analysis, is this managed by one individual or one department, or is it a collaborative effort between departments within your company? Let's look at what you guys have to say. Give you guys some time to answer. This is going to be our last poll question of the learning event. Okay, let's see what we've got. It's a collaborative effort. Excellent, fantastic. Again, there's no right way, wrong way of doing it. One thing you definitely want, because you want everybody to feel that they are a part of the quality management system. And it's not just of a quality management system. So when I say QMS or quality management system, I'm putting the Q in parentheses. It could be your environmental management system. It could be an integrated management system. It could be a pharmaceutical management system. It could be really any management system. You want people involved. Nobody likes just being told what to do. You want people involved so that they understand what the situation is and what the remedial efforts have to look like, so that you can meet any regulatory and statutory requirements or certification requirements or customer requirements or even internal requirements. You need people's buy-in, and the way you get their buy-in is if you include them in the conversation. So I'm very happy to see that I have a staggering 82% on collaborative effort. I think that's fantastic. For those of you that answered it's individual or one department, if it's an individual, I need to ask you something then. Is the individual that is responsible for doing it, are they a subject matter expert on everything? So how can they if not, how can they effectively determine a potential root cause? They might be the ones chaperoning the process, but it's important that the departments are the ones that are handling the root cause analysis. So this is a template that we can typically use whenever we're doing a corrective action. You'll notice that at the very top, we have all of the general information that we need to know. Then we have the description of an event, the immediate actions that are taken. Analyzing risk as a result of that event occurring is a great way of making risk proactive within your organization. Doing a root cause analysis, and you notice that I put in parentheses 5 whys, fishbone diagram, etc. I highly recommend that you give the choice to the individual who has to do the risk assessment, so that they use a tool that they feel comfortable with. Then you have your action plan. You might have a follow-up. in the follow-up, your follow-up is like your effectiveness check, right? So that effectiveness check, it really depends on what it is that you're implementing or what you've implemented. Your effectiveness check might happen as soon as, let's say, if you're trying to mitigate a contamination issue, it might be as soon after as you've made the change within the company. In other cases, let's say in the case that I've given you with onboarding a new piece of equipment, in this case, this might be slightly different. You might not be purchasing a new piece of equipment for another year and a half. So in that case, maybe you'll do small follow-ups here and there, periodic follow-ups, but you might only want to close your corrective action after you've implemented a new piece of equipment. Now, your follow-ups might also be hand in hand with any audits that were done. So typically speaking, if you're doing any regulatory audits or you've done any regulatory audits, your auditor might tell you you've got this time frame in which you need to close off the corrective action. If it's a certification audit and you've received a minor nonconformance, generally that time lapse looks more like a 12-month period. And if it's a major, you might only have 3 months. So that really all depends. So it does depend on the context of the event and on the risk of that event. Hisham, it's all yours.
Thank you, Sabrina, for all the information. Definitely did learn a lot myself, so it was very engaging. For additional information, if you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, we just have the YouTube channel up and running recently. You can see a lot more webinars, live recordings, facility tours, and some training sessions there. We also do have some additional trainings that are upcoming. These are some of the dates. You should have access to those. So if there's any training requirements, please make sure that you register ahead of time. And if there are any questions in regards to the webinar that you just were part of, or if you have any questions regarding the topic or additional topics, feel free to reach out to Sabrina or myself. You should see on the screen our emails and all of the different ways to be able to connect with us. We did want to open it up a little bit for some of the questions that we received in the chat. We won't have a lot of time, so maybe we could take one question. A question that we got, Sabrina, very quickly is there is a risk analysis section 6 on the RCA form. Is that mandatory?
So how you determine risk it's up to you to determine it. I just gave examples of things that you can use. In terms of using something specific, is it mandatory? They haven't made any one way of analyzing risk mandatory. It could be formal, it could be informal. You can decide to document it, like you can decide to just speak about it. Like I make my recommendations, I recommend that it is documented just so that you have something that you can go back to and that you can further discuss and look at, hey, last year we were looking at succession planning and it was a high risk. Where are we at today? So they haven't made anything mandatory, but if you look at some of the recommendations I made, I think you can leverage some of the data there.
Okay, one last question, and then we'll wrap it up. For the additional questions that you guys submitted, we will definitely respond to those. We would just be sending you email responses. But the last question that we can take right now, is there RCA software available online?
I haven't seen any, and I'm always weary about using software or just using a program, because sometimes you need to use your creativity to be able to get to a root cause analysis. So I'm I have one that one of my colleagues had mentioned, and that name escapes me. But one, I mean, if I think about it, I don't know who it is that asked that question, but I am more than happy to share that information. I'm going to just go back in my notes and I'll pick one up that maybe you can use if you are looking for something that's already streamlined and quick. But again, remember, like, use your creativity in doing RCA. You don't just want a machine or AI to direct the process for you.
Okay, well, that's all the questions that we have time for. Thank you all for attending. And again, if you have any additional questions or if you'd like to get more information, please do check out our social medias and get in touch with us. We'd love to connect with you.